All right, we're recording.
Okay, I'm going to call the June 28th, 2022 Ad Hoc Parking Committee meeting to order. And this morning we have with us Bob from the committee. Rob is not able to join us, and then the manager and the assistant to the manager. So I guess because we don't have a quorum, since I'm not in the room, we can't approve the June 14th minutes. So we'll table that until next month. Okay. So then the next item on the agenda would be update on purchase of some new parking meters. And Manager Bryant, do you want to walk us through the information that we got from, I guess, Mike Kennedy is the one who put this together?
Yeah, so Mike is our public works expert on the parking meters, and per the committee's request, our public works manager asked Mike to look into what it would take if we wanted meters that have the free time button on them. So the price quote in your packet is what it would cost to convert all the meters to ones like that. I believe that price is around $32,000, I want to say, give or take. So that's the information. I'll admit I have my own opinions on that, but I'll unless you really want to hear them, I'll hold those for the time being and look forward to what you, Barbara, and Bob think about all that.
Well, I had a couple of questions when I saw that. So the two questions were, do we have to replace all 65 at once? And if we didn't, would the cost be proportional? And then the other question was, well, what would they cost if we didn't get the free time button? So it's like, to be able to compare, to say, well, should we go down that route? Those are the questions I had on the 32,000 part of this, but then I had questions on the other parts of this. I
can go ahead and answer those two questions. It would be proportional. I think that, if we're replacing the meters, I don't know, my preference is that we do it all at once instead of a few at a time. But again, that's kind of more about, there's not a right or wrong answer. That's more of a policy sort of question.
Yeah.
And then the other component is, I think back in April, the quote that Jeff and Mike got for just replacing, the older, meters with a standard one like the rest would be $8,000.
So that was just to replace the old analog meters.
That was to replace the 65 analog meters. And this quote is to replace those 65 meters with the free time button.
So to replace all 65 was 8,000. I didn't remember that it was that. Okay. So it's a huge differential to get the free time button, which is really seems kind of odd, but okay. Okay.
Well, I think part of it is because you have to and keep in mind, like, mechanical skills is like my least strong subject. My understanding is that it's because in the one situation you're just changing one meter head for another, whereas in the other, I think you actually have to it involves drilling holes, and it involves some sort of modifications to exist. There's something more complicated about installing the free time button.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm
not the expert on.
Yeah, me neither. I would have just thought it's a different head that you just put on the pole. So interesting. Okay. And then I don't know what the other items were that were on here, but especially like the prepaid smart cards.
Let's see.
I just was like, is that anything that we need to consider? I wasn't sure why. Was that a quote that the company doing this quoting just thought we ought to know that? Or is there something that Public Works is suggesting that we do. I mean, there were just other items on here that I wasn't sure what they were for and whether we needed to consider them or not.
Let me actually open that file up then. Let's see here. Actually, just for the benefit of future recording, I'm going to share my screen while I have this document.
Sure.
Oh, here. Smart card reader. Yeah, I have no idea what smart card reader means, but I don't think Public Works is necessarily recommending that we do that. I think this is just something the vendor put on there. I'm sorry, that line 3 down near the bottom, prepaid smart cards, that's not something that they were suggesting that we would do. I wasn't even sure what it meant. I think that's like, okay, I think I know what that is. That's like, if the reason I would think we would have that, and I actually talked with Park Mobile about something like this, and which we're not doing, but it's something we talk about. It's like if like a borough vehicle needed to park, or if people from the public, I think, wanted to do like the smart card thing. Because you see it as a quantity of 1,000. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think with Park Mobile, I don't think that's something we would really be interested in doing. Okay. So the other fees the other items that they're suggesting that are on here we wouldn't need to get them in order to have, if we wanted to do the free time button meters. The only thing we need to worry about is this part. Okay. Well, I guess it's closer to 33,500. Just the 65 units and with the free time button and the freight charges. Right. Yep. Okay. So I guess at our next meeting, the committee should make a decision for a recommendation on this then, right? And what I'll do is in the meeting packet for the next meeting, I'll have both this price quote and the original meter price quote. Okay. That'd be great. Okay. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the municipal lot parking and towing ordinance update. And so the first thing I want to just say is that council adopted this ordinance at the June 16th meeting. So this is now in effect, which is wonderful. And so we had talked at our last parking committee meeting about what the next steps would be. And one was to pass the ordinance on to the chief of police so that he could make whatever tweaks need to be made to the police directives to have it now be completely in line. Oh, I just noticed that it says I'm Janet Fortner right now. If you could change my name. So. Sure. Because I don't think I can do it. I was trying to do it before and said I got to remember to mention it and I forgot. Thank you. My sister doesn't want to attend these meetings. So anyway, to sort of let them do some tweaks to the police directives. And then the other was for the office to recommend to the committee a parking permitting for 100 Conway, 201 Sabine, whatever recommendations you wanted to make. Yeah, so my recommendation, and sorry I didn't have a chance to write a memo on this for the packet. Given the size of the parking lot at 100 Conway and all the different uses that are placed on it between the park, the library, and the municipal building, I think that that the ordinance as is probably works out pretty well for the 100 Conway parking lot. And I don't think under any circumstance we should allow, people to, park there, beyond the time frames established in the ordinance.
Which is basically you can't park more than 24 hours. So I just want to raise one thought real quick before we switch to 201 Sabine. Do we want to have something saying, though, it's okay to park there in a snow emergency? Because we as a committee had talked about that before.
I think the ordinance already says that.
Does it?
If it doesn't, we can double check. If it doesn't, then I would be fine with that policy.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Because I didn't think we actually put that in there, because I think we said, oh, we want all that to be part of the, like, a resolution parking permitting, so that we wouldn't have to change.
That's right. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So
just make a note of that.
yeah. So the policy should say, hey, you can park in here with this one exception, in snow emergencies.
Yeah, and something else I want to make sure we're on the same page about with 100 Conway and talking about 24 hours. I'm not 100% sure, but I do think some of the property owners that live on the 100 block of Conway Ave, the ones that are on the Borough Hall Municipal building side of the street, I think some of them also park in that lot, like after hours. And again, I don't have any issue with that. Again, as long as it's not a car sitting there for 24 hours continuously. If it's someone who, they park their car there overnight, they go to work or whatever during the day, they turn their car back and park there, or whatever, that's fine.
Yes. Yeah, it's I'm going to leave my car there for 3 weeks. That it's like, no.
For 3 years, or how long someone has been in there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
For 201 Sabine, again, same thing about if it's no emergency, anyone can park in there as long as they need to. Otherwise, I've given it's the opposite situation right now, given that it's a much larger parking lot and currently does not have the same strain of use on it as 100 Conway, I would be open to allowing some kind of permit parking there. My thought process, and I think we talked a little bit at previous committee meetings about this, is you pay per spot, and so if you have a bigger vehicle that takes up multiple spots, well, how many spots you need, that's how many you pay for. And I was thinking something like $100 a month per spot. And then obviously I think we want to restrict the number of spots available, because then we don't want to, preclude the actual primary uses of that lot, being Sabine Park and the actual 201 Sabine building. So just looking at the size and scope of the parking lot, I was thinking the 15 spots, like in the back corner, which honestly is where a bunch of long-term parking is already going on in that parking lot.
Okay. Bob, it just occurred to me that I forgot to ask you if you had any comments on the parking meter thing. And so I'm going to ask you that real quick and then see if you have any comments on the anything on 201 Sabine. Because I think what we'll have to do with the parking in the municipal lots is, again, we can vote on that at our next meeting. So we have any thoughts to give Manager Bryant now, that would be good.
No, thank you, Margaret. I have nothing to add right now.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. So if you want to bring something to the committee at our July meeting, then we can maybe consider that and put it into place.
Yeah, I'll write up a memo along the lines of what we just talked about here.
Okay.
That way we actually have the policy in writing as well.
That would be great. Okay. So the next thing on our agenda is residential parking, and there are just a few, what I think of in some ways is sort of detailed questions that I think we need to talk about, whether we have to talk about them today or maybe want to wait until all of us are together, or at least two of us in the room to be able to make decisions. I'm not sure. But I'd first like to just see if anybody had any comments on where we are so far, if we all have, we all feel really clear about the decisions we've made so far. And 'cause I did a summary of that for everyone, and I just wanted to see if anybody had any comments on that.
So I'm only seeing the two documents. The parking questions and the recommendations to council.
Right. It's that recommendations that where I summarized what we've said so far. That's the one that I was wondering, do you have any? I just wanted to make sure that I captured everything accurately in that.
Oh, no, I have nothing to add.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and I did only send two documents. I'm not sure what more.
You answered the question.
Okay. And Manager Bryant, Michelle, did you have a chance to look at and see if there was anything in there that you said, well, that's good?
Michelle?
I had nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I also thought it was an accurate reflection.
Okay. Good. All right. So, I think we could. So I'd like us to talk a little bit about commercial parking today too. So I think the only thing I want to mention right now about residential parking is just briefly some of the questions that I think we could maybe consider at our next meeting to just nail down just so we know where this is going, not because I don't think we're going to get into these details necessarily when we make recommendations to council at the July business meeting, but just so that we've settled on those. And that's around how we might handle, if we're going to do anything any differently from how things are done right now for people who live in multifamily dwellings on streets that have current parking restrictions. And so I think we just need to talk through that a little bit to make sure, because we've talked about it at different times. I think we just want to make sure, okay, yeah, no, we're either keeping the status quo or we want to make a tweak here or there. So I think that's an area that we'll need to have a little bit of conversation about. And then also this question of what we want to do if somebody improperly attests to having no driveway and how we want to handle that. So one thing I did think about, though, that I just wanted to put out there and have you think about when I was thinking about describing how the rollout might go, and because we've talked about how it would be staggered, and I think we talked about how we were looking at, and Bob, I looked for synonyms for anything other than neighborhood, and I think you're right, neighborhood is the best, but I thought it didn't hurt to look, and I looked, and I was like, yeah, I couldn't come up with anything else anything that described it any better. But I think that when we've talked about this before, if we think about the way the three neighborhoods, the Nelson Nygaard zones that we've talked about using, they labeled the first one as being kind of north of the downtown business district. And then the second one being the area around the business district, and the third one being the south side. And we've talked about the rollout before. I think we were talking about, well, the first rollout would be for the folks in the business district area. So, which is like, if you're numbering it, it's zone 2. And so I was like, you wouldn't think that you'd start with 2. You'd think you'd start with 1, but renumber. That got me to thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't give them numbers. Maybe we should give them names. And that's where I came up with north, central, and south. I don't know whether I don't care. It's just occurred to me. So I'm just putting it out there. And if we want to consider that, that's fine. And if we don't, I don't care if it's 1, 2, and 3. I just thought, well, this might be helpful to other people who maybe aren't as familiar with the map, but north, south, and central you can kind of visualize. So anyway, it's for something for the committee to and the office to think about if they have a preference. So, all right. So, anybody have anything they want to say about residential parking before we move to commercial parking?
Sure, I have a couple comments.
Sure.
I think whatever the office feels is the most appropriate policy around the issue of parking, the access station.
Mm-hmm.
They think a fine is going to be more effective fine. If they think that revocation, like with a warning, that way you can have a discussion, because there may be some residents who share a driveway and it was theirs in the sense that it was the neighbor's driveway, the neighbor was claiming the driveway, and so they, there could easily be a little issue there, and that the office would want to have the latitude to work out. Mm-hmm. So I think rather than just imposing a fine, that maybe the office would have another way to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's how a lot of issues in the borough work, so thank you for that, Bob. We could certainly, in the ordinance, put some sort of fine in it, so that way, as a last resort, we could fall back on that. But I agree, I think the way it would probably work is it would first be a conversation with someone hey, either you misunderstood or lied or whatever, and you just need to pay for your permit appropriately. And then if they don't pay for the permit, then we revoke it. And then if they're still, parking or whatever, then they're going to start getting ticketed and that kind of thing.
Right. The reason for even addressing the question, Bob, is we have to know whether we have to put something in the ordinance or not. If we don't allow, at least that's my understanding, if we don't allow for a fine in the ordinance, then we can't do a fine. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. So,
Yeah,
I think that makes sense. And then with the naming, I like the word neighborhood a lot as well, actually. So, Bob, thank you for that suggestion. And Barbara, I actually like the idea of the more descriptive name instead of the number, because I think that's going to lead to less confusion for residents and staff.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And visitors.
I like the names you gave it. Those are good.
Okay.
I agree. I think North, Central, and South works really well, Barbara.
Thank you.
We talk about multifamily now.
We can. We can, because we're at 8. We have time. I want to make sure we talk about commercial a little bit too. So yeah, Bob, please go ahead.
Just the residential, I still am of the opinion that the multifamily designation should track with the zoning. I just think it's less confusing. As for parking, permitting, multifamily, I think the same rules could apply to individual units within a 5-unit building. If you don't have a parking spot, then you're entitled to the first permit as an on-street grade. The multifamilies, they either have parking or they don't. And they're either on a regulated zone or they're not. So I don't know that we would need to design anything different than what we've already prescribed for individual families.
Well,
so that's my view at this point.
Yeah, and so we've had some conversations about this before, and I kind of captured all the questions that we've come up with. And as I was thinking about this, I thought I need to make sure I understand what we're actually doing right now, so that we know we're either continuing that practice and we're happy with it, or, oh no, we really wanted to do something different. So I'm thinking about people who have absolutely no off-street parking on their property. It's not that they have parking they could pay for, but they choose not to pay for it. It's there is none. And I think as long as they're not on a metered street, if it's a 2-hour zone, they can apply for a permit, and we don't have a limit. Is that a limit for that dwelling? So we don't say, oh, this dwelling can only have X number of parking permits attached to this address. Is that correct, Michelle?
I'm trying to understand the question. So are you referring to, like Bob said, 5-unit apartments, or are you referring to those larger apartments like 300 North Essex that have 100? I don't know how many units they have, but
I'm referring to any multifamily. I'm not trying to put the limit necessarily, but any multifamily that doesn't have some off-street parking on the property. So I don't know, is that only dwellings that have 5 or less units? I don't know. I mean, do we have a dwelling that has 7 units in it and there's no off-street parking? I have no idea. I've not tried to walk the borough and try to figure that out. That to me is different from the 100 plus units that has an underground parking garage.
so right now, as long as you live on a 2-hour zone and you can provide proof of residency, you're eligible for a parking permit.
Okay. And it doesn't matter whether you live in a multifamily dwelling or not.
That is correct.
Okay. And that's true even if you have some underground parking that you might have to pay for.
That is correct.
Okay. So I think what Bob was just saying is that if you have absolutely no place to park your car off street because it just doesn't exist on the property that you're living in, then you would get permits just like anybody else in the borough that lives on a 2-hour block. Is that right, Bob?
Yes, and if you have 4 cars and you have space for one, you're going to pay for, the fee according. It would be exactly the same policy as for single-family dwellings.
Right. Exactly. So there isn't, we're not going to try to cap the number of permits per unit, or we're not going to add anything like that. Correct?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. And we can make this decision formally at our next meeting, but I just want to make sure I understand that's what you were saying.
Can we capture that as a decision that we made that we're going to recommend to Rob?
Right, exactly.
We'll have to have the discussion again.
Right. No. That's what I'm saying, Bob. And I think we're saying because we're not going to have, we're going to treat them as if they're single family. Then we don't need to consider allowing them to park at 201 Sabine for free, because we were thinking we would do that if we were limiting. So
be cautious. I wouldn't say we're going to treat them as single family. I'm going to say this is the multifamily up to 5-unit policy.
Well, can we talk about that a minute too? Should it be the limit, that kind of limit, or should it be whether there's off-street parking available for you?
I'm just saying make the multifamily designation the same as the single family up to 5.
Yeah, I understand.
I think we already have data about multifamily more than 5.
Do we?
I don't think there is one on. I don't know that there is one on a regulated zone, in a regulated zone. I mean, Michelle knows better, but I think we had that discussion. She said there wasn't one in a regulated zone. We're not issuing permits to any residents who live in multifamily more than 5.
Do we know that, Michelle?
The only one that I can think of is 300 North Essex, and that's why it came up in conversation, because I know we issue a lot of permits. There's, with turnover with apartment complexes that, it's unknown how many of those residents have permits at a single time, because we get so many requests throughout the year. And I know that's larger than 5 units.
Yeah. Way
Michelle, I'm embarrassed to admit this, and I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot with this question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know which apartment building 300 North Essex is?
The name of it.
It's
That's
like,
Narberth Hall.
yeah, and it's actually one of the existing 4-story apartment buildings on North Essex Avenue.
Yeah.
Just in case people didn't realize that it's already a 4-story.
Right.
4-story apartment building. It's that one.
Right. with no elevator though.
Oh,
At least that's my understanding from somebody who lived there. So, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So
I'm comfortable saying, like, let's permit them all the same.
yeah.
Because here's the thing, we had some informal data that says people who live in buildings like that, only half of them have cars anyway. And so I don't know that we're really running ourselves into a stuck, getting stuck or creating, if it turns out in 5 years that this policy is creating problems, then it can be readdressed.
right. So when you say treating them all the same, who's the they? Could you please define?
Today is each residential address. Presumably, each residential address would have the privilege of applying for a parking permit, up to 4 parking permits. So there would be a database, I guess, that would be created with each residential address in the regulated parking zone. Each of those individual addresses would be allowed to permit up to 4 cars at the designated rate. They would all be treated the same. It wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
It would just be an address.
Right. And the address would include apartment number. So as apartment, so apartment number 1 is one residence. Apartment number 2 is another residence. I just want to be very clear.
We could call them dwelling units.
Right, right. And so this is why I was saying, do we need to make a distinction about treating something with 5 or less one way than 5 or more? I'm like, maybe we don't even need to have this distinction at all. We're just like saying, hey, we're not creating some separate structure for multifamily dwellings that we're now thinking maybe that's not necessary. And maybe, so I could see where there might be some concern down the road for new apartment buildings. But I think at that time, parking for those buildings needs to be addressed as they're coming before, planning commission and council, that's maybe the place to address those things rather than trying to put something into our program right now where we can't even anticipate what might, plan for the future.
Yeah, but zoning regulations already regulate parking.
Well, yes, but they don't.
Requirements. I mean, parking, the required parking. So, they're only going to be able to, any development's only going to be accredited with a certain number of on-street parking spaces. And otherwise, they're going to have to create off-street, and then, we're back where we're in. It's
right.
The same difference.
Right. And so if there was some issue like, they're on a metered street, well, that is already taken care of by that. So, okay. So I think that what we can basically say is we really don't need to worry about something special for multifamily dwellings. And we can recommend that to Rob and see if he agrees with us. So. Okay. So, commercial parking, and I think it's important for us to talk about that a little bit in conjunction with residential, because we have some areas where commercial and residential parking needs are, there's a challenge there because both, there are needs for both, but it's, how do you solve, how do you give them both what they need? And I guess what we've talked in the past, we've talked a little bit too about, should we have a commercial parking zone, like an area that would be used for, the patrons of businesses, for the parking for business owners and their employees, or some mix of that. And I guess what I don't have any real thoughts about how we might go about meeting all the conflicting needs. So I'm open to hearing what other members of the committee and anyone else has to say. So Bob, I can see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I have a strong opinion about this. I think it's fine to just, for commercial property owners,
to either have their own on-site parking, some of them do, or to park in non-regulated neighborhoods. As Samantha reminded us, I guess somebody reminded her that Bill Martin used to say, you know, parking like in Narberth and walking to your business is like not so different than like parking in the parking lot at the mall and walking to your business. And or something.
Yeah,
He said
that was a shorter walk to park in Narberth and walk than it is to walk around the mall.
And people don't complain about having to walk from
more
their home.
elegantly. So, you know, so if I'm like working at the Bed Bath and Beyond, they're probably supposed to park close to the train station in Wynwood, you know, close to Wynwood Road. It's a further walk than it would be to walk from an unregulated street in Narberth to my business in downtown Narberth. I guess that's the point. And the same is true for the postal employees who I've been watching park for 20 years. You know, like in my neighborhood, which is unregulated, they park there and they come and go, and they share actually a lot of on-street parking with the yoga students who come and go all day too. So I don't think we have I guess my comments are based on my lived experience, but on the observation that we don't have a problem there. And I think the commercial people will say, well, I'd like to park near my store. And I think we'll have to say, well, that's just not the situation. You know, that's not the way it is.
I think it might be, if I may, Barbara.
Sure.
I think following up on Bob's point, and I hope this is following up on your point, I think it's more of an educational thing than maybe an actual policy thing, like letting people know. You know, I think there's that fun little map I shared. I forget if I shared the whole committee or just you, Barbara, that I found like going through the borough archives from like 1995 or something. That was like, here's all the places you can park in Narberth, you know, and that the NBA did back then. And, you know, maybe putting together something like that again might be worthwhile. You know, making sure people know that, again, as long as you're not parking overnight, you know, if you want to come park, you know, down at 100 Conway, if there's any spaces available, you know, people are welcome to do that. You know, we've had some, when I spoke with, this might be getting beyond the scope of this conversation, but I mean, like when I spoke with the bank, you know, their manager last year was comfortable getting people, you know, parking in that lot. You know, and again, I think there's some other follow-up conversations to have with other property owners about whether they'd be willing in their off hours to make, you know, their parking lots available. And then as Bob mentioned as well, and you have the unregulated zones in addition to that.
And I think it's really important, Barbara, for the council and for the committee to communicate that it's really our desire to have less regulations here. We don't want to create more regulations for business owners and commercial property owners to follow. In fact, we'd rather like reduce the red tape and have no regulations around where they should be parking. It's easier for us to, we don't want to dictate where somebody who owns a business parks their car.
Well, maybe with one exception though, which is the issue that the mayor raised about people, and it isn't just business owners or employees, because anybody can do this, but feeding the meter all day long and leaving your car in a spot for.
I think that's handled by our on-street parking policy and our enforcement. You know, like
we do need
the license plate in the old. I just think you have to recognize that under the new regulations and with the new scanners and that kind of thing, that's meter feeding is a thing of the past. I think we've handled that, so I don't think we need to discuss it again.
No, we do. We will have to make an ordinance change to have fines for parking, to be allowed to ticket again and again and again. That's.
Didn't we decide to do that already?
We haven't formally talked about it. No, Bob. We just had an email saying we would be. So yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah. So we'll have to do that. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clear that we weren't, when you said we don't want to regulate where people can park. And I just wanted to make sure we were.
Commercial property owners.
Well, yeah, but they're not going to be able to sit and feed the meter in front of their space.
And it sounds like the solution is, it sounds like education, it sounds like enforcement, and it sounds like the main ordinance change we would be talking about doing is right now, while the ordinance does have meter feeding being illegal, we're only allowed to ticket someone once a day, whether they're meter feeding or whether they just don't pay the meter.
Right.
So we would change the ordinance so that if you're parked at a meter and you either don't pay it or you're feeding the meter, we could ticket you every single time you do it.
Right. And so we'll strongly disincentivize that behavior.
My point is, Barbara, that that's not targeted at property owners or commercial business owners.
I wasn't saying it was.
That's a regulation that applies to everyone.
Yes, and I wasn't saying it was. I just wanted to make that clear. I guess then the other thing that we need to talk about is we currently right now in our ordinance allow commercial properties to get some on-street parking permits, in the 2-hour regulated zones. And I think the question is then, should we take that away? Is that something we want to do? And if we do we take it away just for future applications, or do we take away the ones that are there already? Because there are some places where that is causing some conflict. Manager Bryan.
I have a strong opinion. I mean, if the committee feels differently, I totally understand, but I will admit I have a strong opinion on this. I think I expressed at our last meeting, and that I think allowing commercial businesses to get residential permits is a completely broken system that the office has no reasonable way to track or enforce. Mm-hmm. And I would be for the complete abolishment of it. And just looking at, in particular, looking at Montgomery Ave, I got on Google Maps and just did like a satellite view of Montgomery Avenue. There are little parking lots all along, Montgomery Avenue. So I mean, that's my thought on it is, unless a problem presents itself, I think having it is a bigger problem than the problem that would maybe be caused by not having it.
Yeah, and I think there's no way we can even begin to know why that was put in place in the first place. There was obviously some problem they were trying to address, but this doesn't seem like the right way to address it.
I agree with the manager, and I hope we all agree with her that that's the right policy. It's called a residential parking permitting system. It's designed for the benefit of the residents who live within the borough of Narberth, and commercial and business property owners have many, many options about where to park their cars. And I think whatever was happening, it had to do with convenience, providing somebody a convenience, and how much of a convenience you could anyway.
Yeah. I know we had, from the last meeting, there was an outstanding question about caliber collision. And so I did ask the chief of police about that. He said he would have our full-time parking controller, Paul, go down there and talk to Caliber about what they're doing and how they were handled in the past. And they would get back to me about that.
Oh, great. That would be good to see if then, so that we can know whether, is there some issue that we can head off a problem with after this, after we come up with our policy. It certainly makes sense to think about that. Okay. We had the thought that but I think these were questions that we had earlier on in our conversation before we had much conversation about residential parking. These are just questions that had come kind of like popcorn style up, and I put them in the list. This thought of, well, maybe we would have a commercial parking zone, and that in that zone, we'd have different fee structures for business owners and employees who wanted to park in that zone. So some kind of idea of, incentivizing parking further away from the business district for those folks. I feel like we've kind of moved away from that thought. And I just want to make sure that, Bob, you don't have any lingering thoughts about that or that we need to bring this back up, that was just something that maybe we, as an idea, we had in the very beginning. And
I think maybe it's just something that we hold in the margins for future consideration. If indeed there's excess parking resource available and commercial property owners want to pay for the privilege of having some parking closer, well, then that could be designed. But I think we don't really have the baseline at this time from which to even design a system that complicated. But
yeah,
does that make sense to you?
I would agree with that.
okay, that makes sense. And then the other thing that we just had as a thought was that, we talked a lot about parking meter fees when we were considering Park Mobile. And we just said, we're not going to change any of the fees. But we said, well, maybe when we talk about commercial parking, we'll want to talk about changing the parking meter fees. I don't think we're at that point yet that we want to talk about that. I just want to make sure everybody agreed with that also might be a future consideration.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Wonderful. We're like getting near the end of our questions. This is a little kind of.
Congratulations, Barbara.
Yeah.
You're like you're. This is like needlepoint here.
Yes. There's lots of threads. So I think at this point, the last. Well, is there anything else on commercial parking? Anybody has any thoughts about? Okay, so the other thing on the agenda was talking about the feasibility of sharing some of the private parking lots for public parking. And I think that there needs to be a little more
If
groundwork laid for that.
we may, I'd like to, we can just table this for next meeting. I'd love to put together a summary for the committee of the outreach that I've done so far on that topic.
Super.
Kind of where that's at, and some of the legal and logistical issues we'll need to talk through that have come up as part of that effort.
Right. Will that, have you taken a look at that lot on Iona next to Insignia?
It's funny, actually, I have not. That actually came up on a completely separate Borough matter the other day. So that is on my to-do list.
Okay, because I have a reason to walk through that lot to get to a building on Montgomery Avenue. And if there's 2 cars parked in there, that's a lot. I'm like, it's weird. And I think this just doesn't make sense to have it sitting there empty.
Yeah, especially if how much pressure is under the parking around that.
In that block, exactly. Something doesn't seem right. So, okay, that would be great. Okay.
Barbara, I want to just bring something to the attention of the committee. While we're on the topic of looking at like sort of maybe extra parking lots, there's one on Windsor Avenue that belongs to it's associated with a residential, I believe, condominium building, multifamily. And it's all across I don't know what block. Windsor's confusing. It might be the 200 block or the 100 block, but it's on the right. It's on the south side, and it's like got 4 parking spaces, and I've never seen a car parked in it. And it's basically like in the front yard of the building, or it's in like the side yard of the building. It's a concrete parking lot. Across from the dentist. On that block with the really nice Queen Anne style houses.
Yeah, I can definitely put that on the list.
Oh, that one. Yes.
What's interesting about that parking lot, since it exists, maybe it's one that could be used for borough residential parking. possibly, like as just like in the same way that an on-street space is, if the owner were amenable, or if the owner's amenable, maybe they don't know that they have permission to restore the landscape there. Maybe they might still believe that they're required to have that parking to satisfy the parking requirement for their building, because they also have parking underneath.
Yes.
My hunch
That's right,
is,
yeah.
and my hunch is that what they did in order to build a building was to create 2 parking spaces per residence. So now they have the overflow in the yard, and like they could restore it to more
Yeah.
permeable, storm efficient kind of landscape, or we use it, or maybe they want to loan it to anyway.
Yeah,
Just
self-productive
wanted to
use
put that on your
yeah.
radar.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Bob. I'll put that on my list.
you're right. There are never cars there. Yeah. That's, yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, that's everything in the discussion on parking section. The other thing on the agenda was a park mobile usage update that we agreed you'd provide monthly, and I don't think this is the necessarily time for that, but
We can really start it, maybe the first meeting of each month, because then we'll have a full month of data. But Michelle shared some very encouraging sort of news about Park Mobile. If you want to share with the committee, Michelle.
Yeah, so I was just curious. I believe it was yesterday looking at the transactions, and there were over 900 so far.
wow. And that's
Wow.
like in what, 2 weeks, if that?
2.5, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So to me, that's like really like a piece of data we want to track before we make any decisions about parking meter heads.
Yep.
Because we may learn something that informs our decision. Maybe.
Sure.
Maybe, yeah, that's true.
The other interesting thing with it, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't it again, we only have 3 data points so far, but hasn't it grown like week over week as well?
Yes, I think more people are seeing it and using it each week.
Mm. So, yeah.
So cool.
Well, it will be interesting to see. I know you do know how much cash is coming in, right? So we can see if that has dropped way off. That'd be interesting to know that too.
Yeah, like to kind of know the percentage.
Yeah. That's yep. Mhm. Cool. That's very exciting. Okay. I can tell there's nobody in the room because the owl is showing me out that way. It's very cool. So, and I don't see anybody in Zoom either. So, our next meeting is July 12th at 8 a.m. And I don't think anybody has anything else. So, thank everybody for their time. And, Samantha.
No, I was just saying bye.
Oh, okay. Okay. Super.
Good job,
All right.
Barbara.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.